Hello and welcome to the Connected Life webinars with Dr. Stephen Fonso. My name is Brittany and I'm here on your behalf to ask your pressing questions while Dr. Steve provides us with his expertise. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you that a recorded version of this webinar will be available for you once we're finished here today. So if there's anything you missed or if the topic becomes too heavy at times, you'll always have the chance to come back to it later. Today's topic is a big one. Today we'll be discussing heart-centered parenting and divorce stress, enhancing your understanding to help your family heal. So sit back and relax and we'll get started. All right, so today we are unpacking quite a big topic, talking about our families and divorce stress. Now, Dr. Steve, you grew up in a divorced family, right?
I did, yes. My parents split when I was around age 6. So we ended up, going into an apartment and then heading across to the other side of town where I had some other family. So we were on the other side of town, and yeah, that was when I was around the age of 6. That's when the split happened, and yeah, you just as a child, it's something that you absolutely get used to. But there's definitely been you could see the impact and the influence that a scenario like that has on your life, and I wouldn't change it for the world, which we'll maybe get into. But I wouldn't change it for the world, and I'm grateful for the situation exactly the way that it is. But we can kind of maybe unpack some things on how you can actually get to that point.
For sure. And that's a positive way to kind of spin it too, when so many negative feelings can be brought up out of a situation like that, right? So I'm glad that I'm here with you today, somebody who has such a positive outlook and has, worked through a whole ton of things to kind of pop some advice out into the world and help out some other families.
Yeah, for sure. We want more families, more often.
Yes, exactly. So my next question, I guess my first question is, if we were to look from a satellite view, what does the family actually look like? What is happening? So like the dynamic of the family, you know what I'm kind of trying to get at. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you took, because oftentimes in stressful situations, and you can get obviously caught up in the throes of the emotions, and it, we especially under the stress response, we oftentimes get a very narrow perspective on what's occurring. You might be thinking, how am I influencing this child, or hurting myself, or I'm feeling guilty about this, and we're so kind of in our own stuff, so to speak, that our life and perspective of life can get rather narrow just under the stress response. It naturally does that. So yeah, taking a bigger satellite vision of the family, just so that we could have maybe a greater understanding simply of what the family dynamic actually looks like. So you could think of a nuclear family, maybe a mother, father, a child or more, or a nuclear family might be mother, or just a father and children. So just depending on what generally the nuclear family looks like. Although in today's day and age, it's definitely the nuclear family, and the definition of it is changing.
Right.
Essentially, the satellite version of it will actually look quite similar. Because when you look at a satellite vision of a family, if you actually just step far enough away, you'll see that there's personalities and there's personality traits within the family dynamic. And we call it the love matrix, but essentially a family holds a matrix of love. And the matrix of love, as defined through my mentor, Dr. John DeMartini, is equal balance of support and challenge. So at any given time, when you look from a satellite vision perspective of a family, it's almost like all these little lights going off and all these little flickers of support and challenge that are happening simultaneously. One child picks on another child, so they're challenging one kid, then the parent comes in to support them, and then that child feels supported by the parent, and then the other child feels unsupported by that parent, so they're challenged by that parent. And then another child walks in from playing outside and they support and come on the side of one of their siblings. And so the family, from a big, broad, far away perspective, is a matrix of love that is governed by this constant support and challenge matrix that's going on in the system. And if you just actually, as a parent, and I mentioned this in my book, is if you, as a parent, if you take a peek at that, if you just step away, even from an argument, you'll see how there's support and challenge that are going on. There'll be two siblings fighting, and all of a sudden another one will step in to support, or someone will get a phone call from another person to come and support. Like it's an amazing, if you actually step away, it is absolutely incredible on the dynamic and state of equilibrium and balance in a family unit of constant support and challenge. Now, as an individual, you feel the emotions of whether you're supported or challenged in any given moment. So when you take that satellite view and zoom it to an individual person, maybe you in the individual unit of the family, you only feel really supported or challenged in any given moment. But when you step away from it and you see all the players that are going on in there, like all the actors on a stage, so to speak, when they're all there, you see who's actually supporting you and challenging you at the same time. And that it never is just one-sided. Life is never just one-sided. It's equal from both sides. It's just when we're caught in our own little perspective, we can only see whether we're feeling supported or challenged in that given moment.
Yeah.
So the reason that is an important view to take, or at least an important awareness and understanding to have as a parent, is that no matter what you do, whether you divorce or you stay, you yell or you're peaceful, and you're, whatever you're doing, there'll be complementary opposites that are going on in the family dynamic. So if you're at peace, someone's probably at war. Someone is probably yelling while you're at peace, like simultaneously. And I got to give an example. One time I was in a yoga class, and they said, I think I pulled a card or something like that. I wrote something to take home to put on the fridge, and it was the word peace. And so the word peace was on our fridge. And I'll tell you, like, it seemed like all hell broke loose in the house. It was like we had this this word of peace on there, and the polarity was completely opposing that, as people are yelling and arguing, and and I looked at the fridge and I'm like, okay, well, there's clearly this balancing mechanism that's going on. Someone's shooting for peace, someone's trying to be peaceful, there's some war going on. So
the universe said, I think so.
So at any given moment, there's the poles and polarities that are happening in the family dynamic. People are suppressing things, others are expressing things. There's nice and mean polarities that are going on. There's rude and polite polarities that are going on constantly. Just again, if you take that satellite view, you watch it. The dance is going on constantly. So I think that's important. The satellite picture is important, whether you're just even a couple or whether you have kids. It's constantly going on. There's constant polarities and constant things going on. True balance is momentarily experienced, and then the polarities shift on again. So part of it is appreciation for the family, that it's not supposed to be more support than challenge. It's not supposed to be more relaxed than tense. It's just that's not the setup of the structure of the universe. It's not the structure of the family dynamic. There's constant breakdown and build up, and any polarity you could think of a family can express. They express it or repress it, and that's constantly happening in the family unit.
Right. Thanks for unpacking that.
Well, it's important for parents, because we get attached to the family unit having to be one side.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, like I
Yeah.
just want some darn support around here, and not recognizing, not seeing where it is. You
Yeah.
know, or you know, we tend not to look for challenges because challenge elicits stress hormones. But there's maybe
Yeah.
if we get to it, there's benefits to the challengers as well in our life, and just remembering that if we're heart-centered parents, heart-centered means both sides.
Right.
Heart-centered and love doesn't mean one-sided. When yogis speak of the heart, they speak of the neutral mind, and the neutral mind is a combination of both positive and negative.
Right.
So heart-centered parents, if you're a heart-centered parent and you identify with being heart-centered, that's a whole other ballgame to hold the perspective of both support and challenge, positive and negatives, that are constantly going on in the family. And part of our work as heart-centered parents is to continue to look for it, see it, observe it, understand it. After maybe a stressful event, step away so that you can activate your heart center again and see exactly what was going on there for your recovery. So that's what I want to mention about heart-centered parents. From a heart-centered parent and heart-centered leadership standpoint in the family, because generally parents are the leaders in the family, is holding a bit of a satellite perspective to know what's actually going on in the family unit.
Right. And while it's so hard, especially nowadays with all this technology and social media, right? It's hard to really be able to look at your family or your life or whatever it is from a satellite view, because everything is so narrow and you're only seeing things from a certain view. So people are made, and families and parents are made to think that, like, okay, like why isn't this perfect all the time? Or like, why are we angry all the time? Or these people look super happy all the time, whereas they don't realize that, well, they're super happy now, but there are moments in the background that you don't see. And it really
don't we know as families, it's like, you know, grumpy, grumpy, grumpy. Okay, I'm taking a picture. Yeah. So that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Right. The reality is we'll throw on the smiling face as everyone's grabbing their positions or setting up the camera, or
you
get
have
your elbow to
Photoshop.
get your elbow to my ribs, or you know, okay, camera's on. You know. Smiling, happy family.
Oh, that's awesome. So now that we kind of have unpacked the whole family dynamic and have clarified that, I want to unpack a word from the title of the webinar, stress. So stress is something that you've talked about a lot over time, over the last however many years. It's a topic that people, I think, align with you. Now, I want to just ask a question. So when it comes to divorce, now this is kind of a heavy word, but would you say that divorce stress could lead to like trauma? And like, would trauma, or what would your definition of trauma be? Because it can be such a heavy and triggering word, and like, oh my gosh, scary, I'm traumatizing my kids. I don't want to think that way. But yeah, if you could, I guess maybe just, are the two similar, or is there a definite like line in between the two that like either it's one or the other?
Yeah.
Would you, with your expertise in stress, what would you?
Yeah. So maybe we can categorize it. So let's say EU stress is a healthy stress that is designed. You can think of eustress as part of love, and it's part of an inspired stress. So when someone takes on a really juicy project, a family could be a very juicy project for sure. If you're inspired by it, there's going to be that challenge and support that's going on, and that challenge when you're inspired activates a eustress. It gets you in the zone, so it's an important stressor to get the most out of us. Now, then it becomes a distress when we begin to see when we move out of the heart and into the mind, let's say, and we begin to look at a reality as more negative than positive, as we start to go down that slope, it now becomes distress, because we're losing the ability to see the advantages to anything. And so that now becomes distress, and distress activates, or tends to activate, different emotional states like anger, irritation, frustration, feeling bitter, like those kind of distressful experiences, because we've moved out of the heart and now we're seeing reality from more negatives than positives, and we're not seeing the symmetry and the balance of the love in the family. And so that's distress moving along that lines. You could then take, according to the definition of trauma, you could take that a little further to even more negatives, which creates overwhelm and helplessness. And that would be kind of like a definition of trauma, where there's overwhelm into helplessness. And helplessness is like on the far end of seeing only negatives and no positives. So that would express trauma in the nervous system. And in that state, we freeze up. And we lock up in that state. The state is our body hugely guarded and protective and defensive and trying to preserve the energy. That's like under trauma, where there's overwhelm and helplessness. And in that state, we also, in that helplessness state, we bind in our breathing capacity and we lock out our emotions in that moment in time. So that would be on the far side of kind of the negativity scale in comparison to positive, where you're not seeing any positive whatsoever. It's a reflection of suffering, and suffering, kind of by definition of feeling helpless, according to Wikipedia, suffering and helplessness go hand in hand. And it's the most extreme distortion between negatives and positives, or support and challenge. So you get way more challenge than support. In fact, you barely even see any support. And in a divorce situation where maybe, like for me, for example, like, you don't necessarily intellectually understand, but you're being, essentially the house is being divided. And so you're helpless to that as a child. So it could be, by definition, be classified as traumatic. Because it could freeze the nervous system and create a sense of distress. And for me, I wasn't very vocal. It's not like I articulated that, because I didn't have really the capacity to do so anyways. Life is just life when you're a kid in any situation. It's just your life, and it's just what you go with. But it doesn't take away the effects. Bless you. It doesn't take away the effects of the moment where you're helpless. Okay. And then also, from that time, you might hear other, resentments and shaming and ridiculing and criticisms, and you just don't necessarily know how to interpret it. So you start to shape your reality that this situation, this divorce, is very much more negative for everyone than positive. And now your perspective as a child of a divorce is distorted. And through the healing process, you can figure that stuff out. There's ways to do that, to alter the story and change the experience in your body. There's ways to do that. But yeah, like any time that there's a moment and a creation of an overwhelming energy for the nervous system to handle, when it can't handle it, it locks itself and freezes itself to basically preserve itself. And it'll do that instinctively. It's what we would do as an animal. A spider does it. Touch the belly of a spider. What does it do? It curls in quick, right? So animals by nature, when they feel threatened, and not intellectually threatened, just the organism feels threatened, it'll clench and tighten to preserve its energy and to preserve itself. So a divorce can easily be seen as that, for sure. And there's no shame in that. It's just the realities of introducing an experience that can be overwhelming.
Right.
And it might have been essential for people, but yet we just have to get over, kind of the label of divorce and look more so as it's an energetic experience that everybody's involved in. And it's challenging, and oftentimes more challenging than you feel necessarily supported. And and so that can clench the system very easily.
Right.
I know it did for me, but
Yeah. Well, and with especially young children or growing children, it's something that, again, like you mentioned, like they don't really have anything else to base it off of. So you just kind of absorb and adapt, and okay, this is what this is supposed to be like. So even though I guess the child's nervous system is kind of undergoing distress, they don't necessarily know it at the time.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Brittany, because most of that type of stress is below the conscious radar. So the kids aren't necessarily going to be aware even enough generally to articulate it, depending on the age range. But an instinctive reflexive tension to defend someone is not felt. It's just automatic. It's reflexive.
Right. Yeah.
It's like if we're ever at the doctor and you get the little smack on the knee for check your reflexes. I mean, you don't really have a say over it. It's just there. The reflex is there. And so the same thing in your body is, if the body has an energetic experience of distress in the family unit, it will clench. So a divorce is a separation divorce is hard enough on the parents, and it's a friction and a distress that obviously has to create the separation, and that's going to ripple like a rock in water. It's going to ripple out and be felt as an experience. And if the nervous system can handle that, okay, but most, I would say, are not going to be able to process that extremely well, just because it's not just a moment in time, but it's an event that kind of has rippling effects to keep going week after week, day after day, even month after month, and year after year. The ripples of that continue. And so the nervous system has to continue to process this information from its original tightening. Right. And that's just, it's tough to do.
Yeah. Now, is there a way to help your children grieve the separation of their parents?
Yeah, I would say that, at least in my studies and both my studies and my experience, is that especially working with people and kind of being involved in the healing process, is anytime there's suffering going on, being honest about the suffering is important, because it allows the nervous system to feel validated and to relax into the experience. So as a parent, if I do something that disturbs the system, as an example, I was griping with my son the other day about something, and I don't usually raise my voice, so it's kind of outside my behavioral range for them. But I really leaned into my voice, and you could just feel the whole reflexive, defensive stance of him, and it instantly kind of changed the dynamic between us, because we were both kind of guarded. And so later that day, I said to him, just so you know, Dad was really frustrated in that moment, and it wasn't even about you. It was just about you kind of being in the way of my frustration in that moment. And instantly you could just see him. And I said, it wasn't about you. And it wasn't anything actually that you did. Even though I was outletting on him of something that he was doing. It wasn't even about him. It was about something that happened about 20 minutes earlier. And it just festered in my system a bit, and he happened to be in the way. And so he got the brunt of it. And just being honest about not apologizing, because I wasn't sorry for it, because I know that it comes with both sides of positive and negative. So I wasn't apologizing for it. I was just being honest to him that in that moment I was frustrated and he was in the way.
It's
and
the
I just wanted him to
acknowledgement.
know that. And it wasn't anything that he did, because that's the truth. And it wasn't even about him, which is the truth. It was just about me managing my own emotional state. So he relaxed into it. And then he got curious and said, oh, well, what were you frustrated about? So instantly it starts changing the game by being completely honest about your feelings and maybe validating their experience and their feelings. And what you are going through, what you are feeling, and maybe what they're feeling. And just to validate each other's experience is important.
Well, and that's something that they can pick up on again later, right? Because they are like sponges. When you're honest and you can acknowledge that, well, what I did in that moment was because of this reason, and completely being open with them, they see that and like, oh, okay. Well, the next time you're frustrated and something happens, he might go, Dad, why are you frustrated? What happened? Is there something going on? Instead of thinking, oh crap, what did I do? Is it me? Like, he hates me. He's so mad at me. He doesn't love me. All those, thoughts as a kid that kind of go through your mind.
And you and like you said, you can't, in a defensive state, rationalizing won't work. So you have to make sure that all guards are down. And again, topic specific, depending on age, what a parent feels comfortable in speaking the truth from their heart. I didn't need to give him all the details of what I was frustrated about. He didn't need to know that. I just said, I was just frustrated about something at work and something that I haven't been achieving that I've wanted to achieve for a while and just haven't been able to pull it off yet. He gets that. He's 12 years old. It's like he forges and has projects, and he knows what it's like to get frustrated when you're not finishing a project. So that's that. And that was the honest thing. I didn't need to go into all the details because it's not necessary. It's just, I wanted to validate that experience that we both had. And it just eases the tension and allows him to drop his guard, allows me to feel good about being honest with him and again, not apologetic for it, because there's a difference between feeling like you've done more harm to somebody and being honest with the mutual experience of what you're having. And being honest with the experience is a much healthier way and more heart-centered way to go about to reconnect the hearts, so to speak, than trying to apologize like you did something wrong. Well, I'm not saying I did something wrong. I said that was the best I had in that moment to handle my frustration. Period. It's the best I had. I'm not going to apologize for it. But that's the best I did in that moment. And so Dad isn't perfect. Dad isn't whatever. It's just that's what was in that moment. And that helps to bridge the hearts, that honesty. When you start distorting yourself, that's when the hearts become a little bit skewed. And you lose that synergy in the relationship. So yeah, I think for just to come back, parents being honest with how they feel in the moment, and also validating the child's experience. Like, hey, I know this must be really tough. Period. We don't need to keep going on and on. Like, just man, I know this must be really tough. Like, you got to think when someone's suffering, you might as well assume that we all suffer. Buddha talks about that. There's suffering every day. But when there's a death or a loss, you go up to someone and you're just like, man, like, I know, just it must be absolutely horrible. Like, you don't go into a big song and dance in the funeral, right? You don't go into a big thing and a big story about the person. It's just not the time. When someone's suffering, You just acknowledge their suffering.
Yep.
That's all the nervous system wants to hear, is that I'm suffering and someone hears it and I'm not alone. They get it.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's enough to crack the heart open and to connect everything together. And
Yeah.
that's it. You don't need big discussions. You don't need, it's not required, especially at certain age ranges. It's not required to go into big, long discussions of the whys of things. It's more important in the healing process to validate the suffering.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Because they feel loved and safe and cared for. And you're not sloughing something off. You're not saying they're fine. You're not saying they're tough. They'll work through it. They're resilient kids. Yeah, they'll live, but there's still a skill set as a heart-centered parent. There's still a skill set of making that connection. And the connection isn't through the mind. The connection is through the heart and through honesty and through a sincerity of a mutual experience. And you do that, you got your hearts on board.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really resonated with me for a second. I kind of got lost.
Yeah.
At least we know it's working. No, that was really good.
Our hearts met in that moment.
They did meet, yes. No, that's just, I mean, even you can use that on so many levels, regardless of our topic today or whatever. It's just, yeah, it's a very a humble and kind of like universal experience in a way. Just that
suffering is a universal experience. You know, the divorce is unique. A divorce experience is a unique experience. It has flavors in and of itself, but at the core of it, most people in a divorce are suffering. Most people, like, we might as well just say that most people in a divorce situation are suffering on some level, right? Otherwise the divorce probably wouldn't have happened. And so you could assume that in a divorce, as the family unit is experiencing that, everyone's suffering from the perceived loss of somebody in there.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when I left, there was a perceived loss of my dad. So I was grieving the loss of my dad, essentially. Right? Yeah. And I also value a family unit. So as I was going on in later years, and you hear kids with both parents at home, and I would be grieving because I would perceive a loss of a family unit. So, and I didn't necessarily have the intellectual prowess to redefine my family unit. I didn't have that intellectual capacity. So you just start seeing things from perceived loss. So there's grieving that constantly goes on. So there's suffering.
Right.
And again, the divorce is just a thing. We're all going to be suffering in our own way.
Yeah.
But again, we're talking about the divorce. So, validating that experience and just knowing that people are going to be perceiving loss. So are kids. And the experience of the loss initiates suffering. So your kids are suffering.
Yeah.
They're suffering. And that's okay because it's part of the human experience. The faster as a parent you can honor that your kids are suffering, the more aware you are in terms of, okay, what do I do to connect to that suffering?
Yeah.
So, yeah, not everyone's empowered, during that, at least those initial stages.
Yep, very true. My next question, I mean, not always, but typically during a divorce or even prior to, which is why divorces usually happen, partners fight quite a lot. And now when there's a lot of fighting going on in a family, when there's children present, is there anything that parents can do to potentially reverse the distress to their children during those moments that have already happened?
Yes, there is. When the the family unit, you can think of almost like tied together with a bunch of strings, each person having kind of string attachments to each other. And so as a parent, when your perspective is distorted around someone, you're resentful to, say, another partner or something like that, it's almost like the tension between you is pulling the strings between you two. Well, everybody else is kind of attached in that string matrix. So as that tension gets pulled, the pulling happens all the way through the family. And so kids are going to feel that. Not only you, but the kids are feeling that tension, the resentments, that kind of stuff that's going on. So if you're striving towards being a heart-centered parent, then your job is to clear your resentment to the partner. Because what you're doing is you're taking the tension, that string that's also felt through the rest of the family, and you're unwinding your own tension. And as you do that, you unwind the strings to the person, because your perception is changing and your energy is changing, and you're also unwinding the strings to the kids.
Right.
So immediately, if you clear that resentment, then it's felt through the whole family.
Right.
And you open yourself up to not only give more love, but receive more love. So your whole biology and chemistry and tension patterns start to change.
Right.
And the state that you have changes, and everybody else's state can change with it. So you're not locking it up in that particular state. So the resentment, because people think sometimes resentment is a feeling. The feeling is more of like anger as an emotion. And resentment from the mind, the resentment is seeing that the partner caused you more harm than good. That's really what resentment is. Resentment is that you see the partner as causing you more harm than good. So your job as to bring the heart into center and into the lead would be, how is the partner's behavior benefited me as an individual?
Right.
How have they freed me up? How have they allowed me to be more independent? How has he allowed me, like he or she, how have they allowed me to be a better version of myself to some degree?
Right.
Because they are part of this. And so unless you can see with some clarity of the heart that your partner was challenging you and supporting you to be even a better version of yourself indirectly, then you start opening up.
Right.
And as your perception changes, the resentment then can start to shift. How you see the partner starts to shift, and then how your dynamic can start to shift, then how the kid's dynamic starts to shift. So you're always responsible. The only person you can change is your own perception and your own energy state around something. That's it. It's all really that you take full responsibility for. So if you're feeling angry, bitter, that's your gig. That's your job to resolve that. I'm good at helping people do that. It's part of what I've dedicated my life to. But that's essentially the job. Because when the heart can open, you free up. You free all the bonds for a second, and you allow that matrix of the family to reshift around again, for what you had as a very locked, tight pattern of defensive guarding around that individual. So, and not only that, just for people to consider, when you're in a resentful state, you're not in your best problem-solving state. You're not in your most resourceful state. So even if you drop the kids off at that person's house and you're in a resentful state, your language patterns change, your stress hormones change. So really, it's about you. Like, your inner world is changed because of your relationship to that individual. So for your own sake, for your own well-being's sake, for your own stress hormones' sake, it's wise to clear those resentments so that when you drop the kids off at the front door, you're coming from a place of ease that's not detrimentally impacting your own physiology.
Yeah.
Okay. And as you drop them off, the language patterns can be different. Your tone and your posturing can be different.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be a different you showing up at the door, and your kids feel that.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's the job of a heart-centered parent. Now, if you want to be ignorant and not and just be blind to it,
Yeah.
then you don't have to do a darn thing and you just kind of keep going on. But if your focus is on living from your heart, then that's essentially your job. Your job is to balance out your own awareness and your own energy to give yourself the best darn life. And as you do that, it ripples.
Everything will fall into place. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going kind of, I guess, based on just last question and the question previous. Is it okay to share the details of your ongoing divorce with your children? And is there a fine line? Is there an age limit that you might say, well, for this age, it's maybe okay, but for this age, no? Because, well, there's honesty, right? But then is there too much that maybe the kids don't really need to know about?
Yeah, my general rule. So this is just some personal general rule.
Yeah.
My general rule is I didn't broach a topic until they got curious about it.
Okay.
So if they ask, generally speaking, if they ask, then I'm going to trust on some level. There's some level of readiness to hear something.
Mm-hmm.
So I might just start to chip away at some of the superficial bits of information until there's like a satisfactory contentment.
Yeah.
That goes on. And that's been pretty much my general rule from the get-go. If Logan inquired, in that instance that I gave you, if Logan inquired more about my frustration, I might give him a few more details.
Yeah.
And see where he kind of sits with that.
Yeah.
And if he's still curious about more and hasn't put it all together yet, to his satisfaction,
mm-hmm.
then I might give him a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with kids knowing stuff because, my God, like, go on social media, they know more stuff than we can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
So it depends, number one, on how vulnerable you want to be, and how much you want to open up. So I mean, it's to the comfort level of the parent for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, like, if kids are curious, like, you tend to start asking questions when you're curious and when you're ready to begin to hear something. So if there's a level of curiosity from the child, I wouldn't just sit down and just kind of start hammering out data and content for them, because number one, they weren't really they didn't really ask for it, or they weren't really ready, and you're going to hit them like a bomb, and they're not going to have any frame of reference.
Right.
But you could also ask them, just say, hey, would you like to hear more about this? Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. Okay. Yep. Give them a smidge and see how that flies.
Yeah.
You know, if they, hey, would you like to hear more about this? No, I don't really care. Okay, then just
that's
leave it.
it.
They're clearly not ready.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of like, are they curious? And then just ask them if they're interested in knowing. So you can take those both, and just kind of drip feed a bit of the info, just to see what their capacity is until they're content. Once they're content, then you can stop there, because they've received enough information that they can process, and they're satisfied with that. So when, it's like reading a book. If you get the gist of the book, you're good with it. You don't need to read the whole darn book. Like, it's just, I got the gist. I read a few of the chapter titles. I get it. I get what they're going to be talking about. Okay, like, that's satisfactory to me. So I take the same approach. Drip feed them some titles and see if that satisfies them. And if not, you can just kind of keep going a little bit deeper if needed.
Yeah. So would you say then, to kind of just round that off, if they're curious and asking questions, then maybe just start with a little bit of a drip of information, and see where that takes them? Or, because I mean, and not speaking from experience because my parents are still together, but
Yeah.
I have friends and my fiance and things like that. And typically what I've kind of experienced is that because parents are so close to their children, they want that connection and almost want that sometimes of a validation of their suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So then it comes out as maybe too many details.
Like the parents want the validation, or the children?
Well, the parents kind of want that validation of their suffering. So there's maybe too many details that kind of spill out.
Yeah.
Just kind of want to
So
talk
what I
about,
would say is,
so what would you say in that instance?
well, I'd say you're definitely not wanting to make your kids your confidant.
Yeah.
Like they're not your sounding board. They're not your, you're not your therapist or counselor or anything
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
They're you're there to love them and support them and challenge them appropriately and how you feel like in your natural style and your values is how you want to parent. But they're definitely not a sounding board, and they don't have the intellectual capacity anyways to even understand it. Sometimes you know what it's like. You have to go into massive amounts of detail in order to actually get the whole picture of something. Well, do you want to open that can of worms? So that's what I'm saying. Like, you come with a little level of discretion. If the topic is of interest, if it naturally comes up organically, which might happen too, just feed it a little bit, and like even sensing from yourself, like, and your awareness can gauge whether you're now stepping outside the lines of your zone or not. Like, your body will give you the feedback, your mind will give you the feedback to give you the range probably in which you're willing to go before you start getting a bit vulnerable. And so, stopping at those points and just kind of assessing, like, okay, here I am. I've already given details. I'm sensing like I'd have to unpack this next topic if I was to go on. Do I want to just stop here?
Yeah.
Do I feel good about this? Can I say that's enough for me right now? But I'd really like to know. Well, you know what? I think I've had enough for me right now.
Right.
And we can come back to it maybe later.
Yeah.
So again, they're not your sounding board. They're not your confidant. They're not your therapist or counselor. They are they're your children, and they don't need to know all the details for sure. Right. They don't need to know all the details. They probably don't want to know all the details anyways.
But if they're curious and they ask, then be honest.
Be honest up until those points in which you, again, just observe if they're being satisfied.
Yeah.
And just observe yourself if you're within your zone of what information you're wanting to output. And it's okay, again, to be honest with them and say, I'm good with that. I'm going to stop there, and maybe we can pick this up in a week because that's just enough information that I want to give right now.
Yeah.
And they got to be okay with that because you're done. Yeah.
And that's perfectly okay to set boundaries.
Yeah, you're showing them that you're setting your own boundaries. You might think, well, maybe I should be supportive and tell them all the details. Well, you're also supporting them to show them that you actually have some boundaries, that you're like, okay, I'm good with this. Like, this is my zone right now that I want to express, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's good.
Again, when you come back and look at that satellite picture of the family, you'll realize, that wherever you stop is right for you.
Yeah.
And the information that they get is right for them in that moment. And really the family dynamic, when you take that big satellite picture, is just this perfection of love of all these little supports and challenges that are going on. So you can stop and start whenever the heck you please. It's not about supporting them, because even as you support them, you're now challenging them, because you might say, I'm going to support them and give them a whole bunch of information. Well, now you're challenging their intellect because they don't have the intellectual capacity to manage all that information.
Yeah.
So you think you're supporting them and you're challenging them intellectually at the same time. So they might not be ready for that. So again, you got to come to where your zone is, sense where their zone is, and you work from that space. And you'll know when their heart's content. You'll know when your heart's content, and probably where your heart's content is probably where they've had enough, probably as well. So you want to just honor that part.
Perfect. There it is. This next question, I think maybe everyone can kind of get on board with at some point in their life. Well, maybe not you and Lee, because you've been together for so long. But I certainly can, and I'm not divorced. But how are we supposed to stay cool and calm when you have a very difficult ex and they just always seem to be testing you, especially around kids, I think even more importantly, right? Keeping that calm, cool, collected air about yourself when your ex is present, and they obviously, that dynamic is there.
Yeah. So there's gonna be difficulties.
Yeah.
So I'll give you kind of like a couple of things. One is breathing is important because it's just a very simple, effective, quick way to help yourself to self-regulate your nervous system. So again, back to some core stuff of essential breathing. In 5 seconds, out 5 seconds, in 7 seconds, out 7 seconds, some symmetrical type of breathing, rhythmic breathing to help your nervous system to regulate itself and its own physiology, its own stress hormones. That's important work to do, outside of the meeting, so to speak.
Yeah, I was just
with your ex,
clarify,
okay? Yeah, as the ex comes up, you're not going to say, "Oh, hold on, I'm just going to like breathe in 7, out 7."
Moment.
It's more of a preparation. You think of the work to do with a really stubborn or hard-nosed ex or something like that is your work is done outside of the meeting time.
Right.
So your job is to prep your system for stuff like that. So one, you prep your system, make sure that you're in a vital state, a well state. Obviously, things like fitness and exercise and lowering inflammation in your body, all things that naturally lower stress hormones, those are an advantage to you. You can do those. You can eat well, you can be well hydrated. It does help your brain function better. Get good fatty acids and good fats in your life, your brain functions better. So those things, although they might seem like they're lifestyle strategies, they're physiological strategies to help to get the most out of your system. So those are important because they can lower inflammation and provide you with essential nutrients to think and function well. If you're deficient in magnesium, for example, well, your muscles are going to be more bound and tight. So that doesn't help the recovery process, after you deal with your ex. So, part of that is, can I reset? Can I be vital as a human being? What do I need to do that? Because the greater vitality I have, the more resilience I'm going to have around this individual. So just from a physical standpoint, lifestyle stuff is fantastic to do to help to lower your inflammation and increase your energy and your resilience. So that right off the bat. The more you're hopped up on chemicals and crappy food and deficient in nutrients and sitting around sedentary and sucking back ice cream, depressed watching movies, then you got to meet your ex. Well, you're not going to be in a very ready state to manage the challenge. So you can do the lifestyle stuff for sure on your own. That will help to have you be more resilient and vital and energized. So that's definitely one thing. Then on maybe like more of a higher cognitive level is usually what gets activated is triggers. And, the triggers of certain ways that ex expresses him or herself. And that's real. Like the triggers are real and their expressions that completely send an electric lightning bolt through your entire body are real. And the one thing that you can do about it in your prep work is you could also anticipate how they're going to respond. How they've at least anticipated some of their response in the past. And you can do some quiet time, some meditation. Okay, when they, some acting out in your mind of when I receive this challenge, what's my response going to be? How am I going to posture my body? who am I going to be if I get that expression? Okay, if I get this expression, if they're being all bitter and rude and that tone of voice he or she usually does, okay?
Yeah.
When I hear that, okay, I'm going to laugh. I'm just going to laugh it off. And I'm picturing myself in that moment just laughing it off.
Maybe don't laugh
Okay?
in the moment.
Normally I'd gripe. Normally I'd want to fight back. But
Yeah.
I'm going to envision myself when he or she does that, boom, I'm just going to laugh hysterically at them. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're just starting to set yourself up for that experience.
A lighter-hearted
and
moment.
giving yourself that like visualization
Yeah.
of being different. You know,
Yeah.
and it's not much different than athletes do when they picture themselves, you know, making basketball shots. There was an old research study that they took 20 people and a group, I think it was for 4 or 6 weeks. One group did nothing. Another group shot, I think, an hour of free throws a day.
Yeah.
And another group visualized themselves making free throws. The group that visualized themselves, I think, did only 5% worse than the ones that actually shot every day for an hour. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So visualization could help to set yourself up for interactions.
Yeah.
Okay. So it'll show you like that you can maybe accomplish some of that and change your state. So that's another option.
Right.
Third option is to actually extrapolate what exactly bothers you about them. And then go and own that particular trait in yourself to see where you actually do that in your own life and why you do it. I was talking with a group last night at a workshop, and we were talking about people that get triggered and triggers at work and people that are negative, negative at work. And I said, well, one option is go in and start thinking about moments in time where you were negative, and then find out in that specific moment what was the benefit to you of being negative, because there was a benefit that was going on for you in that moment to be negative, and so you want to start to look at okay, when was I rude? When was I bitter? When was I irritable? When was I negative? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and what was the benefit? Why was I actually doing that in that moment? And the more you do that, maybe 10, 15, 20 times, if you pick out 10 times, 15 times you were negative and see why you were negative in that moment, you'll start to see why your ex is being negative.
Right.
You'll start to see that pattern, so to speak. And you'll start to reveal that pattern and be able to start to change your story about it. Right. And you feel really empowered by doing so. So it's just a third one. It's a little more advanced. The first one, change your lifestyle strategies, get healthy, get vital, get energized. Second is you could do some visualization of how you're going to be in front of that person. And third is owning the trait, which takes a little bit more of a desire for some self-mastery, but you can own traits that bother you and find the benefits in them so that you could see exactly how those traits operate as a human being in the world. And it's a tremendous freeing exercise to start owning traits. So, and that's one thing that I've learned from my mentor is studying human traits and how those impact our body and minds and subconscious minds and things like that. So those are 3 things that you can do.
Well, and that kind of answered my next question, because a lot of times too, right, we kind of forget when you're dealing with children and a whole family, you're kind of worrying about taking care of everybody else and, well, how are they taking this? And I want to make sure they're okay and all that kind of stuff. And it's so important, I think, maybe for your kids to see that you are taking care of yourself and that you are putting the work in to better yourself and to get to another level instead of kind of just staying in that stagnant water that you were in prior to the divorce or the relationship ending, and then to now, because your kids are just they see you, and they feel you, they sense you, they can, and whatever you do is kind of whatever they will eventually do, right?
Yeah, you are setting the tone. You're a model. You're a mentor.
Mm.
There's a field of study called epigenetics, which is basically that our DNA and our genes are morphing to experiences and perceptions of our environment. And genes they're seeing is not fixed, but epigenetics says that the genes can morph and change what they're producing based on as the environment changes. So when you're practicing healthy lifestyle practices, you're epigenetically changing the gene expression in your children. If you're up active and moving around, you're changing the genetic expression in your children. If you're emphasizing, managing your stress, it's epigenetically being memorized in your children's systems as, okay, this is a practice that I could utilize. And so your kids are constantly looking at strategies that they're collecting information that what my parents are doing are strategies to live. So
Yeah.
so they're recording that. So they won't be able to um, put all your strategies into context all the time of why you're doing it. They're just going to memorize that you do it.
Yeah.
So they'll be more likely to default to those strategies, not necessarily knowing why, but almost just under what we call mirror neurons, just under mirroring the environment that they grew up in. So your how you manage yourself, your state, your lifestyle practices are being epigenetically memorized and neurologically memorized at this moment in time by your children as strategies on how to live and survive successfully in life.
Right.
So hold that perspective as a parent. And it might bring more awareness to what's going on and the language you use and the words you say and how you talk and how you speak and how you act and all those things. But again, it's a developing awareness. So no one's perfect. I'm not. God, my goodness. Not like I got it down pat, and I don't even think there is a getting down pat. It's just
Yeah.
as you evolve as a human being, just know that you want to be that model. And I wrote in the book when I think the chapter was included was, imagine that you have a movie camera on you for a day and the whole world sees it. Okay, what standards are you setting for yourself? What are you doing? What are you up
Yeah.
to? If you're the model, because you are the model, that's the thing. You're the model for your kids. You're helping to wire in their nervous systems how to behave in the world.
Yeah.
So and it's a big responsibility to do that. And so just keeping that in mind, and keep moving forward in your life from your most authentic space, your best foot forward, and your kids will absorb what they need to, and eventually, just like all of us, when we get to certain ages, we'll get rid of what doesn't serve us in our life, and we'll keep the stuff that's meaningful and most important and works well for us. So do your best for you, for yourself, knowing that it directly impacts your entire family, and then you got to surrender to it,
Right.
because your kids are going to like some of it and they're not going to like others, and they're going to keep you around and not, and
Of
so
course.
be it. But you just do your
Life.
best.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is there a certain way to help your kids through the change? And would you say it's maybe necessary, or could it be overkill to send your kids to therapy because of a divorce? What are your
Well,
thoughts on that?
definitely not my forte or my call on what any
Right.
parent does to send them
That,
to therapy or counseling or whatnot. Um, uh,
I think it's more of like the question of like, well, what do I do for my child? Right?
mm-hmm.
Because there's breathing exercises and things like that, but um, depending on the child, like what might work for one child might not work for the other. So is it,
Well, let me answer this. Is that one of the most essential human needs for a child in their development is safety.
yes,
They need safety, and they need safety and they need comfort as a baseline. All of us do. We need certainty safety, and comfort as a baseline need. And so what that does is that helps our energy to replenish. It helps us to feel safe and secure. It helps us to breathe. It helps us to feel like the world is okay. And it's an important facet to have in the family unit. So if there's a divorce, it obviously shakes things up. And so more drama and more drama and more drama adds more uncertainty, and continues to destabilize the system for your kids. And so they're going to gravitate to, they're going to fill that need somehow. So I suggest to parents, you be the one to fill the need of safety and security and comfort for them.
Right.
If you dramatize everything, it's going to be uncertain, and they're going to find little outlets to give them certainty and comfort and safety. And those options might not be all the ones that you really want or dream or idealize for your children.
Right.
So I would say, make sure they feel safe and comfortable and cared for, and that as a baseline of what you do.
Right.
And beyond that, there's other options, but I would say, regardless of what therapists or counselors or anyone can do that's outside of the family unit to provide for support, you're their main love mode, and you provide them. You're the one to provide them with safety and security and love. That's a role. So if you don't feel it, someone else will, because that's the matrix. They're going to extend the family, and they're going to find it somewhere else. They might find it in another sibling. They might find it in the other parent. Or if none of that's going on, they're going to find it elsewhere. Maybe a grandparent, maybe a friend, maybe a boyfriend or girlfriend down the road. Who knows? They're going to be seeking that and looking for that to help to stabilize their system.
Right.
So that's really what the need is, the primary need. When I see parents, oftentimes what they'll notice is when kids first start, I see it either in divorce, when kids first start going to school, or when there's just instability for a bit in the family, the immune systems start getting mucked up and crashing. And I see that in kids when they come in, the stuffy noses, because things are destabilized, and the system is under momentary stress. So the immune system shuts down a bit, and they tend to get a little bit sicker under quick changes in their environment, because you're destabilizing a stable system. So just know that they need that comfort and stability to replenish their life energy, to build a strong immune system. You need that part to come in to keep your kids nice and healthy. So that's what I say first and foremost for parents is make sure they feel safe, they feel validated, they feel secure, they feel loved.
And whatever you choose.
And they feel okay.
They're met, then perfect. How can parents ensure that they're giving their family the absolute best opportunity to heal?
Well, I think that kind of comes a little bit later on down the road of the healing process. The best that parents can do is, if the parent is feeling that they're alive, they're well, they're building their resilience, their internal world is continuing to get organized, know that that's reflecting out to the kids.
Right.
So that's probably the best way to take care of the unit, is to make sure that you're alive, that you're well, that you're vital, that you're continuing to build your own resilience, because at the end of the day, that's all you really have control over. If you're sick and down, stressed out, frustrated, pulling your hair out, and trying to give your kid advice, they're going to read it all over you. Like
Right.
it's not, you're not, nor are you going to really give the best advice,
Yep.
or they're not going to feel it necessarily from you, you know, if you're in that state. So, I mean, you might use them as a bit of a soothing blanket.
Yeah.
you know, kids could be good at, they're like, you know, little stuffed animals. You can cuddle up to them and they soothe you, but we're supposed to be the adults. But at times we're like kids. So sometimes we might find ourselves using our kids as little soothers, to relax us. But that's not ideal. You know, you want to be able to be the adult, the vital adult, and mentor for your child. You don't necessarily want to have to use them to comfort you. Although I will say that, hey, they are beautiful and cute, and they can be used as little cuddly toys. That's not the role really of a heart-centered parent.
Yeah.
So keep yourself vital and well, and if you feel good about your state and your situation, boom, just know with confidence you're doing everything that you need to for your parent, as a parent, because you're going to be in your most resourceful state. So you're going to make the best decisions that you possibly can, and you're going to be communicating the best you can because you're in the best state possible. So your actions, your behaviors, your advice, all that stuff is a beautiful consequence of your state of wellness and well-being. So put some focus on you. It's not selfish. It's actually a selfless act, because by modeling that, you're ingraining that in your child. Yeah. So do it. Like, be well. Your kids want to see you well. They don't. I wrote that in the book. Like, your kids want to see you well. Like, people want to see people well. So the more well you are, the more vital the whole family is, and the more resilient everybody is. Yeah. So give yourself permission to be well, Yes. Like, work with enough people that, it's like a badge of honor to feel guilty and feel miserable, because
it's like that. It's even on social media.
It's I just want to say, like, it's not
community.
Yeah. It's not necessary. You don't need to drag that around with you. It doesn't really serve anybody. It doesn't serve you. It devalues your own self-worth and your confidence. So, I mean, you don't want that for your own kids. So why would you want that for yourself? You don't want them dragging around baggage through their life. Why would you want that for yourself? So give yourself permission to be awesome and to be great. And regardless of your family dynamic, just know your kids are going to work it through, and you're going to work it through. And at the end of the day, in X amount of years, they're going to be off doing their own thing and living life and figuring it out, just like all of us are continuing to figure it out. And that game doesn't seem to stop. I still got 80-year-olds in my practice that still say they're figuring it out. It's hilarious. So, give yourself permission to be awesome, because it's going to reflect and emanate around your environment, and it's going to emanate through your home. For sure. Yeah. Well, that was my last question. So thank you so much for bringing us through heart-centered parenting and divorce dynamics and divorce stress, and helping out your family to heal. Is there anything that you'd like to add, just last minute? Well, I will say, just look for our upcoming program, because we're going to have a 2-day program coming up. Yeah, we're going to have a 2-day program coming up, and I believe it's at the end of February or early March. So just pay attention to that. StephenFonso.com. It'll be on there, and it's Illumination Experience. And we're going to run you through, on that evening program, we're going to run you through breath work to start to de-armor some of the tensions around life and guards that we put up in our body. So we have about a 5-hour session on the Friday night, and then we take a full day on the Saturday to run through a method to dissolve triggers, guilt, shame, resentment, you name it. We're gonna crush all that down and get you massively aligned in your heart, and you're gonna feel amazingly empowered and really ready to move forward and continue to move forward. So it's going to be an awesome, pretty much almost 2 days of work, but that's going to be coming up within the
2
next
days
4 to
of
6 weeks.
breakthrough.
So
Yes. Awesome. That sounds amazing.
yeah, it's going to be wild.
Yes. So thank you all so much for joining us here today. And most importantly, we always want you to thank yourself for taking the time for you. Well done. It's such a huge step to get your toe in the water to your next step to being, well, more families, more often, right? As always, we want to remind you that Dr. Steve does do one-on-one consultations. So if there's anything that you'd like to discuss, whether it's relationships or anything going on in your life, you can always contact us at info@Verescent to get that going. And either myself, Brittany, or his wife, Lee, can kind of get you started with that. Again, make sure you keep an eye out in your inbox for upcoming webinars and events and Dr. Steve's event that he just mentioned. As we typically like to give our email subscribers an early heads up, so make sure you're also subscribed to our email. Thank you again so much, Dr. Steve, for sharing your knowledge and time with us, and we'll see you all soon.
Really ready to move forward and continue to move forward. So it's going to be an awesome, pretty much almost 2 days of work, but that's going to be coming up within the
2
next
days
4 to
of
6 weeks.
breakthrough.
So
Yes. Awesome. That sounds